Now, this week it's emerged that the government outrageously covered up its scheme to relocate thousands of Afghans to the UK at taxpayers' expense. And yet, in this next story, a Muslim official at the Home Office denied asylum to a Christian woman being pressured into converting to Islam. So, is Islam influencing the Home Office's immigration decisions? Well, to find out, I'm very pleased to be joined by Michael Phillips, who is a solicitor advocate at Andrew Stort Solicitors and who also often works with the Christian Legal Centre of Christian Concern. Welcome to The Sceptic, Michael.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, really good to have you here. So this is an interesting and really quite alarming case that you've been at the centre of this woman that we're calling Maria. And so we'll get into some of the details of this particular claimant in a second. But I suppose it's just worth noting to begin with that typically if someone is claiming that they've been religiously persecuted and trying to claim asylum in Britain, it's quite likely that they would be granted asylum, isn't it?
Yeah. That is often the case. Sometimes you just hear some of the details of some of the cases which come to the news, and it seems as though there are certain people who will claim that they're Christians. They've often, maybe that's a genuine conversion, but there is a large number of people who there is some skepticism concerning maybe they've been accused of a sexual offence in this country, and it's quite a common case. It's quite commonly the case that they will say that they've converted to Christianity. And as well, there's also another type as well who have more extreme Islamic views, and they've been kicked out of their own countries, maybe more secular Islamic countries, which have a secular government, but nonetheless, they're very concerned about having that particular person in their country, and they've been expelled. And so those are the kinds of religions that we see put forward in order to grant asylum. But in this particular case, it was somebody who really was only ultimately, she would say, one religion, but she was forced to convert to Islam as a result of what happened to her in the workplace. So initially a Christian, she was brought up a Christian, and then she was forced to convert in the workplace when the place that she worked initially was quite a secular place, but it turned into quite an Islamic place. And then she was forced to convert to Islam. And then partway through that process, she decided, no, in fact, I'm not really a Muslim. I'm actually a Christian. I was born a Christian. I don't want to change from being a Christian. And so therefore she deconverted. And at that point, she decided that enough was enough. And a series of things started happening to Maria, which ultimately resulted in threats to her life, threats to her child's life, and her seeking asylum in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, it's quite a shocking case, really. And of course, we don't know precisely where she's come from. That's not been revealed. But just tell us a bit more about her story. I mean, what happened when she came here?
Well, she had a visa to come to the United Kingdom because she acquired that before all of these things happened. So she thought that she wanted somewhere safe to go. And the United Kingdom seemed like a good place to go. She spoke English. And so she arrived in this country. She claimed asylum as soon as she arrived. And then a few days later, she had a meeting in the Home Office with somebody who was a Home Office worker, Home Office caseworker. And initially, she thought it was okay, but she was a little bit concerned because this person was quite clearly from their attire, a Muslim. But anyway, so she went through with that process. It was a very rigorous process. There were lots of questions asked. And so she waited some time. And then eventually the result came back that she was refused asylum. And it was quite shocking. She thought that she came to the United Kingdom, she was going to get refuge here, but she didn't. And she found a lot of things that she had said had been misapplied. So anyway, then she appealed to the tribunal, and an appeal was lodged, and she had a hearing in the first instance before a first instance tribunal judge up in Birmingham. And once again, she found herself in a position in front of Judge Chaudhry whereby he said no. And it was quite a shocking decision. It was full of legal errors and full of it was just a very poor decision. And she thought once again, well, I'm going to have to appeal again. So she appealed a second time to the higher tribunal, so it's the equivalent to the High Court. And the High Court agreed that the first instance decision was quite concerning, and so then remitted it. So they sent it back for another trial, and then the final trial eventually she was then successful. She won, and she was granted asylum. Her husband, and her daughter were allowed to stay in the United Kingdom.
So there's a lot of unusual steps there, but tell us a bit about those legal errors in that first tribunal.
Yeah, I mean, her story was quite an incredible story. In that there was parts of it whereby she was being hounded by her former colleagues who initially tried very nicely and gently to convert her to Islam. She said no, thank you, but no, thank you. And then there was an attempted kidnapping on her daughter, and then there was an attempt to assault her in her house. And eventually, she, at this point in time, all of this, whilst this was happening, she was keeping it from her husband, who was away on business. The reason why she did this, going back a step or two, was because it was said that she'd committed an act of fraud. And she was told by her colleagues that in order to get rid of this allegation, that what she could do was she could convert. And all that was required was just putting on a headscarf, having a photo taken, and going along and saying the Muslim Shahada in front of an imam. And she thought, okay, well, that's fine. I can do that very easily. But she went and did that, and she found that that was just the beginning of the story. That wasn't the end of the story. They wanted her cross to be removed. They wanted her to be divorced from her husband because she was no longer a Christian. And her child had to be brought up as a Muslim. And when she refused and she kicked back, that's when those things that I just mentioned started to happen to her. And she realized that this wasn't just, something with a bit of just to say so. It was, in fact, something that they were taking extremely seriously. So that's how it all started in the first place. And then the judge just said, well, I just don't believe you. And I found it, I just find this too incredible to believe. And didn't really have anything to refute what she was saying. I mean, that's the whole point. Very often when these things happen, there aren't too many witnesses by the very nature of things. But, she had gone to the police. She had reported it to the police. She did have other witnesses. And the question that we asked was, why would a middle-class woman who came from a nice enough area, worked for a bank and had her child in private school, why in those circumstances would she flee to the United Kingdom to live in a bedsit if there wasn't some truth in all of this? And the judge just really failed to grapple with these kinds of questions. And that's why his initial verdict was overturned.
And do you think that's partly because he wasn't happy with this presentation of Islam as trying to coerce her into converting?
Yeah, well, we don't actually know what the religion of the judge was. We know that he had from an Asian background, but we don't know. But what we do know is that we drew to his attention a number of serious concerns with the Home Office report, and there was an expert who gave witness to the tribunal. He gave an expert witness statement just explaining why he thought that the Home Office report was particularly concerning. There was lots of cut and pasting from various other reports on this particular country, but it was all taken out of context and it was spliced in such a way, because very often these countries will say, yes, we have the rule of law, we've got democracy, we've got elections, but the truth of the matter is, and then the report would then say what it's really like on the ground. But what the report writer did for the Home Office was that it took all those nice bits which say this country says this and this country says that about how wonderful they are, but it left out all the other bits which caveated the very nice banner headlines. And so it was a real stitch-up job. And we drew this to the attention of the Home Office, we drew this to the attention of the judge, but it was just almost with the shrug of the shoulders, not bothered. And that was, deeply concerning.
And so also that you mentioned earlier, there was that original decision by the Muslim Home Office official. I mean, there were some questions over that, weren't there?
Yes, there were some questions about that. So there were the questions about the original report, as I said already, but also there was a very bizarre thing whereby this lady had a conversion certificate. So when you convert in this way, you get this nice green papered certificate just to confirm what had happened to you. And so we asked for this back as our exhibit to go in front of the judge. And then I remember it was actually on the day of the hearing that it arrived back in the post, back at the office. And so somebody ran up from the office with it and brought it to court. And in fact, it was no longer green, but it was white. And it had been laminated. So it was all very bizarre. We just couldn't work it out. And she looked at it, scratching her head. And I said, are you sure this is the one? And she'd actually, you could be forgiven for thinking that she was probably on the verge of going mad at this point, but she brought her vicar with her who'd also attended the original appointment with the Home Office. And he said, no, definitely. I'm sure that when she went to the Home Office, we handed over a green certificate and now they've posted back this white certificate. And it was all very strange. And, obviously we don't know what happened. Nobody was there in the Home Office, but it is very concerning that people just don't deal with, or the Home Office didn't deal with this case fairly.
And so this is one particular case, but there are other concerns about this, the influence of Islam in the Home Office. And for instance, there's this civil service Muslim network, which has over 700 members, I think, and is a recent controversy where one of the leaders of that network was on a Zoom call with others and was basically encouraging these Muslim civil servants to influence or obstruct government policy according to their faith. And I mean, do you think this is this case that we're talking about is an example of a wider problem of the kind of Islamization of the civil service?
I mean, I think this particular case potentially could just be the tip of the iceberg, and certainly Dr. Martin Parsons, who is an expert in these matters and has given evidence before in these kinds of cases, he did a supplementary report just saying to the judge, this is a concern. And it seems as though this may be a systemic problem of bias against Christians, because they are a group of people who are in the Middle East, very much vulnerable. But why is it that disproportionately their applications have not been as successful as those people from an Islamic background? And we drew this to the attention of the court, and it just because it seems as though the judge wasn't particularly interested in the first instance what we were saying. It just it was maybe one ear in one ear and out the next, and so it's a fear, and this is what Dr. Parsons has said and alluded to, the fact that there seems to be a systemic bias against Christian believers in their applications for asylum from the Middle East.
And so obviously it was a Muslim employee who made this decision, but of course another form of preference for Islam over Christianity comes from wokeness, and where Islam is generally, Muslims are seen as being on the oppressed side of the ledger and Christians are on the oppressor side, even though there are places like the Middle East and Syria in particular where that really is not the case. But in any case, do you have a sense of which of these two kinds of narratives is more behind this favoritism towards Islam?
I think maybe it's a bit of a convergence between those two particular ideologies as to, certainly when you go around Whitehall and you see the various kind of Pride Progress flags flying and you receive emails from civil servants very often who wish to tell you their pronouns, yet at the same time there is also this movement as well that is very sympathetic to the Islamic faith as well, and seems to be, and you're right, there seems to be a convergence of interest there, and I think it is something which does concern Christians, that they don't want favors, all they want is fairness. If people are having a bit of a hard time, to the extent that they are being chased down the street and people are trying to kidnap their children, they just want a fair hearing. They want to come to a country which they believe is safe in order to escape the horrors of their own country. And that's what Christian asylum seekers would like, and those from other faiths as well. But unfortunately, they are not getting a fair hearing. And that's what happened here, and that's what the concern is of other people in similar situations to Maria.
And to bring this back to Maria, I mean, this is quite a heartbreaking thing she said in her statement, which was, I came to the UK and felt finally safe in a Christian country. And then, well, it turns out that actually that wasn't really how it's working in practice.
Yeah, that is it. And she that's what she said. And at each turn, she was very much hopeful, very much waiting, very nervous as to what was going to be happening. And, this is a process which lasted literally for years. And you can imagine at each stage, waiting for the initial response from the Home Office, from the courts in the first instance, from the High Court, then from the retrial. You just think, anybody with an ounce of common sense would have seen right from the get-go that this is somebody that needed to be granted asylum. It was so obvious that this person had been mistreated and was at risk of their life was at risk if they were to return to their own country. But despite all the evidence that was presented, the expert evidence, it just it didn't land in the first instance. But in the end, it did, and obviously we're thankful that there are still some judges, some people who are in authority who are able to see sense. But people need to know that there is a real concern amongst people who are applying for asylum and other people involved in other parts of the legal system that people who have traditional Christian beliefs are not getting a fair hearing.
And another example of this is that actually hate crimes are looked at by the state quite differently depending on whether they're allegedly done against Christians or Muslims. And so one example is that if a mosque is attacked, it's generally always immediately recorded as a hate crime. But if a church is attacked, it's assumed not to be a hate crime unless proven otherwise. I mean, is this a widespread double standard?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen this, for many years, that there are certain classes of individuals or certain protecting characteristics which are specifically referred to, for example, in the Sentencing Council guidelines. You see that there is an immediate aggravation for certain forms of protected characteristic. And, to the extent that recently you may be aware of the fact that the Sentencing Council guidelines were going to say they're going to be altered to say that a pre-sentence report has to be ordered in certain circumstances, and those certain circumstances, and they listed them. And the people who didn't necessarily merit a pre-sentence report were people who were male, stale, and pale. Whereas those people who are maybe female, who are from some other minority protected group, in those circumstances, then they are those kinds of people who automatically are deserving of that expenditure from the state. And so, a large number of clients that I represent, are very concerned about the fact that they're being treated as second-class citizens and are not receiving the same kind of favors as other people. And I heard that recently from a Roman Catholic priest who said that I think he rang up the police concerning something which happened to him, and the police seemed to be extremely interested when there was a suggestion it was homophobically aggravated in some way. But then when they found that he was a Roman Catholic priest, they seemed to lose all interest. And that's that these stories are anecdotal, but when you hear them again and again, you realize that maybe you think that maybe there is some truth to this.
And so finally, I mean, clearly there's a lot of this kind of ideology about, whether it's coming from woke or whether it's coming from Islam. But what do you think is the best way to combat it?
I think that there has to be a recognition that there is a systemic problem within government organisations that freely promote certain ideas and certain ideologies, and you see this with sometimes the Pride Progress flag at the bottom of a police officer's email address, or the preferred pronouns at the bottom of a civil servant's email address, and you just think, now this is a political ideology, which you are representing the state. You're a neutral actor. You're meant to be investigating a crime, or you're meant to be acting on behalf of the state neutrally. And what this is not good. What you're doing, you're taking one side of a party political debate, and so there has to be that systemic cleaning out. That needs to happen when it comes to the police, social services, the civil service, the education department, teacher unions, all of these various bodies so inured with this ideology that they don't really think it's anything other than asking somebody not to swear. It's seen as so naturally good and so naturally right. They can't see the wood for the trees. So I think that there needs to be that process whereby that government does a root and branches approach on what's on their own department, so that they are just politically neutral and fair to their customers.
Indeed. Well, we're very much trying to fight for that here at the Daily Sceptic. Michael Phillips, thank you very much for coming on The Sceptic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.